Well, guys, I have been putting off doing an actual ranked top X of whatever type of video, but I think it's finally time. I'm going to go ahead and do a top 10 video, and let's jump in, because I'm sure I'm going to ramble about these series because they're some of my favorites. So first of all, welcome to the channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. This is Nerd Level Rising. My name is Jake, and I'm going to talk today about my top 10 favorite ongoing series. So rules for this is just that it has to be ongoing, to be honest. I mean, I understand why people will put different rules on themselves for various reasons, and I think that that's great and it makes a ton of sense. But for me, this is my first time doing a top 10 actually ranked video, and I just wanted to kind of leave it open, and just the only rule I'm putting on it is these are ongoing series. So obviously if it's completed, not going to be on the list. And if I haven't read it, it's not going to be on the list, obviously, right? These are just my favorites that I'm reading and that I'm working on. So let's jump in. Number 10 is going to be The God Eater by Rob J. Hayes. And this was my first Rob J. Hayes book that I have ever read, and he's a legend in the self-published community. And this made me so excited to read the rest of his work. I want to read The War Eternal here in 2025. And man, if I speed through it like I did through these God Eater books and love it just as much, maybe I'll do the rest of his stuff too. I don't know, because his books aren't super long in general. I mean, this is, as far as I'm aware, like the longest book he's written. That could be wrong. Somebody can fact check me there. But when I read this earlier this year when it came out, it was actually kind of chaotic because I was reading it while I was in the process of moving into this apartment. But it was such a nice escape from the stress of moving. And this story it's so cool, man, and I love the way that he's doing this. So the story, this main timeline story of the God Eater, it's sort of a twist on the traditional hero's journey fantasy. And you start out and it feels, I mentioned this, I have a whole video from one of my first videos on my channel was talking about the God Eater and why you should go read it right now. But my feelings on this book were like, it starts off and it's very traditional and it's very familiar, and there's some new stuff, some twists, some really interesting things. It felt like your classic hero's journey mixed with some heavy influences from The Faithful and the Fallen, and I loved that combination. I was like, I'm here for this. This is great. And I'm going through this, and there's some things that I found predictable, that I found like, okay, that's the formula, whatever. It's still fun. And then at the end, there's this huge twist that recontextualizes everything, and I was so wrong the whole time. And that just hooked me so hard, and I love that, man. So this story overall is essentially what happens in the aftermath, many, many years. I think it's like 1,000 years or something, or 1,000. 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years after a group of humans stormed the gates of heaven and killed God, and have been hunting down and eating the angels, where they can gain magical powers. And they're still trying to sort of hunt down these other ones and maintain their power. And that's the premise of the world, right? So now we're following a hero's journey in that world. And it's so interesting. And there's a lot of dark stuff in here. I wouldn't call this grimdark, but there's a lot of dark stuff in here, a lot of violence, a lot of really, really cool magic, a lot of big epic fights. And I loved every aspect of the story, especially how Rob got me with the twist at the end. And then he also released at the same time two prequel novellas that are this and each of the prequel novellas are separately book ones of 3 different trilogies that are running across the different timelines. So we have a prequel series that is, I don't remember the exact timeline, a few hundred years before this. And then there's an even further back one that's like 1,000 years ago, that's sort of going through the attack on heaven, right? So there is, is that right? It's early. I don't know. I'm muddy on the timeline details, but anyway, what we're seeing is this. No, that's not right. Geez, I'm all over the place. Sorry, guys. Number one, y'all know. Hey, if you've been watching the channel, I've been dieting for a bodybuilding show. When this video comes out, that's actually today. So I'm recording this a little bit early because I'll be out of town for that. And if anyone has done this or knows anyone who's done this before, the closer you get, the harder time you have focusing. Your brain just starts to kind of wander. You have a lot of brain fog and that sort of thing. So that's probably what's going on. So forgive me for the timeline details. Nonetheless, we get 3 different timelines that are building all the layers of this story and all the lore and all of the the history, the way that he's weaving together these mysteries and the reveals, and it's at a point now where after reading the 3, which Rob recommends and I wholeheartedly agree, read it in reverse chronological order. So read this first and go backwards through the timeline, because the way that the mysteries and reveals interweave, I don't know who to believe anymore, right? I don't know what's the actual correct history. I don't know. And I can't wait to get more of this. And man, God Eater, awesome. Number 10, favorite ongoing series currently. Number 9, very new entry into the list, The Way of Edan. The Edan trilogy. I've talked about this quite a bit recently. It feels traditional hero's journey as you're kind of starting off with, but there's a lot of other unique, really interesting things that are tied up into this, and it's all mashed together into this really just interesting tapestry of depth of these characters, of the magic of the world that's sort of swirling around this religious war, and everything that we're seeing from all these different POVs is so just engrossing. This, to me, feels the closest to Tolkien of anything else that I have ever read in terms of tone and in terms of just the overall vibe I get when I am in the story, right? When I read this, I'm transported to a different world that feels very similar to Middle-earth in completely unique ways, if that makes any sense, right? It's not Middle-earth at all. It's not a ripoff at all, but it has the same feeling, and it has an atmosphere that's really reminiscent of that, and I love it for that so much. And I love that it's doing new things. This is truly classic fantasy with a modern twist, and it's I love everything about it. And I'm very excited to read book 2 this month, and book 3 will be pretty soon after that. Philip Chase has really created something fantastic here, and obviously it's again only book 1 of the series, and it's already one of my favorite ongoing things because it's just that good. It's just that good. So please go read The Way of Edan. It's not that long, right? It won't take you that long to get through, but there's so much to chew on in the series. Really take your time. Don't try to rush it, and really sit there and absorb it. Absorb it. That's all I can say. It's one of those kind of series, right? So The Way of Edan, book 1 of the Edan trilogy, number 9 on my list. Number 8 is here for a couple of reasons. One is there's a bit of nostalgia, and there's a bit of just good vibes for that reason. 2 is excitement for the future of the series. And 3 is just that it is that good, right? And that is going to be the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. And when I say nostalgia, this was one of the early series that I read as an adult, going through a rejuvenated, newfound love for reading. And this it started with A Song of Ice and Fire as the Game of Thrones TV show was going, and I loved it so much. And then I wanted something similar, so I got into the Wheel of Time. And Sanderson finished the Wheel of Time, so I wanted to try more Sanderson stuff. So I jumped into Mistborn, and this just completely took me over, man. I loved this trilogy so much, and it was one of those things that I didn't know magic could be like this, right? I'd never really had a really hard magic system like this, where it's really a science more than a magic in the world. And learning about that through Vin and through Kelsier and these other characters in book 1, following Vin's journey, and seeing, the heist in book 1 was so much fun, and then seeing how the world grows and expands, and all these other ideas grow and expand throughout the rest of the trilogy. Seeing, I think the romance was really good. I think the action was all really good. I think the big ending sequences were really good. Some of the themes about religion and mental health and perseverance and all of those things that Brandon is so good at exploring are explored really well here. And I loved everything to do with the I don't want to spoil any Cosmere stuff, but with the big bad, shall we say. And we see everything that's going on with that. And then as I continued reading the Cosmere, throughout, then seeing connections and callbacks to this and whatnot was really, really cool. Era 2, I didn't like as much as Era 1, nearly as much. I did like it a good amount, right? I did really enjoy it, but it didn't even touch Era 1 for me. But nonetheless, it was still really fun, and just building on this, the events of Era 1 sort of became the mythos that were the legends and the religions of Era 2. That was sort of more in this turn of the century, electricity is just becoming a thing. We use guns now and all this, which clearly has some interesting implications for a magic system based on metal, So we have some really interesting things with that, trains, all this kind of stuff. There's like some Western vibes. I'm not huge on Westerns, to be honest, which is kind of part of my about it, but I did really like the sort of detective aspects of it, the explorations, yet again, of different mental health struggles, of different just life experiences was so interesting. The humor in that series was ramped up a lot compared to Era 1, that not all of it worked for me, especially early on, but as the series went on, I got more and more used to it, and it started to be more and more fun and engaging for me. And by the end of that series, by the end of The Lost Metal, I was very attached to some of these characters, and I really enjoyed the ending of that. And then looking ahead into Era 3, which all we really know is we're taking another step forward into the future, so we're going to have more technology, which again is going to have more complex interactions with the magic system based on metal. And we also know it's going to be called Ghost Bloods, which if you've read the Cosmere, that's super exciting. So I can't wait for that. If we do indeed get Era 4 in the future, like a space opera type of thing, like, come on, man. I mean, I can't, that's unbelievable to think about. Obviously, that's a very long way off, but man, Mistborn was and is, and I believe shall continue to be a fantastic series and a great entry point for Sanderson's work. If you've never read any of his stuff, it's a great place to start with Mistborn. Okay, we had to cut. That's now the second time in the entire life of my channel that I've made a cut in the middle of the video, and that's because my phone that I'm recording this with ran out of space for video, so it just shut down halfway through, which is great. So I had to clear some space out, and now we're going to finish the video. So number 7 on the list, The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. Now this is like epic fantasy, right? This is epic Dragon Rider fantasy. But that's one of the focal points. But another focal point is the sort of politics of these different nations and these different races that are in conflict. And we're seeing the sort of aftermath of this event that happened hundreds of years in the past here in this prequel novella, The Fall. And we're seeing what's going on with that sort of new empire that's trying to hold on to its power as some of the people that were originally overthrown in the Order are trying to, come back and eventually win the war, right? And win the day at the end. And so we are primarily in the main series following Kalen, who is going through this, your traditional beginning, right? The farm boy to Dragon Rider, that trope, which starts off very traditional. Book 1, A Blood and Fire, it feels very, Wheel of Time and Faithful and the Fallen, and those sorts of stories. But then it very quickly, once you get through the end of Book 1, which I think is sort of the purposeful entry point that Ryan did, of getting you in with something familiar, and then he goes and builds and takes off and does his own thing. And by the time you get to where we're at in the series now, it is fully its own thing. Lots of influences still, of course, but and you can see those, right? And I think that's one of the fun things for me, similar to one of the later series in this list, is picking out the influences and being like, oh, that's fun. Like, I love that series too, or I like the little hat tip there, or I like this. So anyway, all that stuff is cool and it's so fun to see. But The Fall is such an epic kicking off point for the series. And it's tiny. You can read this in one sitting, but there's so much world building. There's so much action. There's just so much packed in to this short story that you can get for free, by the way, on his website. And if you're anything like me, after you read it for free, you're going to want to order the nice physical copy because it's just really cool and it matches the whole series, which is very nice. But, it starts off, like I said, kind of slow, traditional, familiar, and then really becomes just so huge and epic in this magic system that can do so much destruction and so much healing and great things also, but in the right or wrong hands, and then we have the dragons that are just huge and terrifying and these monsters in some sense, but they also can be wonderful and companions. And you get really great relationships between the riders and the dragons. We have a lot of great character work with a lot of emphasis on how particularly the male characters are going through learning to be vulnerable and sort of feeling their emotions. I know that's something that Ryan has been very intentional about trying to explore. There's a lot of great characters in here, right? Everybody talks about how Dane is their favorite character, and I don't begrudge them for that at all. Dane is awesome. My favorite is Belina. I think she is so amazing and so much fun, and I cannot get enough of her when she's on the page. So I hope we continue to get more and more from her as the series continues. But nonetheless, there's some characters who I will not name that you start off feeling a certain way and then you feel differently and more conflicted, and as the series goes on. So much cool stuff being explored here in The Bound and the Broken, and the books just keep getting bigger, and I'm here for it because they're awesome, and I can't wait for book 4 to come out here early 2025. And as far as I'm aware, the plan is still after that to have an eventual 5th book that will end the series and cap off that story. And then he's got a lot more stuff to tell in this world because there's so much you can explore in this world, clearly, and I'm very excited for it. So The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill, number 7 on the list. Number 6, we got to get into some sci-fi, guys. We need to, right? So I chose Red Rising for my number 6 favorite ongoing series at the moment. Book 1 is by far my least favorite in the series. So if you read book 1 and you're like, oh, it's a little bit too YA for me, a little bit too derivative for me, at least give book 2 a chance. Most people leaps and bounds in enjoyment and originality in that book 2. Not that this isn't original, but a lot of people will compare this to Hunger Games, right? So that's the classic example. That's a feeling that I got as well, if I'm being honest. It's still really fun. It's still great. But book 2, it really takes off. Book 2 and 3, that original trilogy, very satisfying, very great. The sequel trilogy, in my opinion, is even better. It gets more mature. We explore more POVs. We explore some deeper and darker themes and the aftermath of everything that happened in the original trilogy. And so when book 7 comes out, that's going to be a day one read for me, absolutely, just like book 4 just like the next book of all of these, right? They're all going to be day one reads. And it's called Red God. That's such an awesome title. And the sequel trilogy has sort of progressively gotten heavier and very dark in book 5, called Dark Age, aptly named. And then book 6, again, very dark, very heavy, but it had some hope and had some big moments that make you feel optimistic in some ways. So I'm really interested to see where book 7 goes and where these characters goes, where we leave them at the end of Lightbringer. It's so hard to wait for more. And I know Pierce is going to take his time and do what he needs to do to get the story how he wants it to be before he releases it out in the world. And I think that's fine, right? I have no problem. I have no problem waiting if the wait is going to be worth it. And I know with Pierce Brown, the wait is going to be worth it. And his prose has gotten progressively better and more engaging as the longer we've gone in the series. It's kind of like Philip's books, where the language is very much a part of the book. The prose is very much a part of the book and a part of the experience. And it's so fun to read his prose now in these later books. He's grown so much as a writer, in my opinion, as the series has gone on. So Red Rising by Pierce Brown, very much a favorite of mine. Number 6 on my list as of right now. Number 5, you guys knew that this was going to be here at some point, right? This is Berserk by Kentaro Miura. This is, wow, what is this story even about, man? I mean, this is... Really, we're following Guts through his... initially, we start the story, we just see him on a warpath. And then we flash back to his past and just see this series of traumatic events that have built him into who he is. And as he's grown and connected with other people in unexpected to him ways, and has been forced to grow as a person. And then things happen at the end of the Golden Age arc, and then we see the aftermath of all of that, and the emotional journey that Guts goes through is, to say it's profound feels like an understatement. It really does. It's so well done. It's so nuanced. It's so powerful. And I know a lot of people are hesitant to read manga for whatever reason. Just the medium kind of puts them off. This is a dark fantasy story that is on par with any character work that I've ever seen, and plot as well, right? And to have the artwork, to me, is a bonus, right? It really is awesome, and the art gets better and better and better as the series goes on. Miura did very sadly pass away before he could finish the series, but if you stop where he left off, I think it's satisfying enough that you can stop there and be okay. But Koji Mori, who was told the ending by Miura and sort of how to get there, he has since taken up the mantle and is, in my opinion, doing a very good job of continuing the story. It's slower going than I would love. I would love to get more regular chapters. Sometimes we go 6-8 months without a chapter, but hey, that's okay. I mean, Miura, towards the end of his life, he was taking a very long hiatus between chapters pretty often. So that's how it goes sometimes with manga. But I can't wait to see how it ends. If we do eventually get a full proper ending. I'm very excited to see how it all comes together, and I have some theories, some guesses, but I'm going to get there along with everyone else who's a fan of the series. So Berserk is just utterly incredible. I have a Beylet tattooed on my arm. There's so many themes at play here, between finding your place in the world, between ambition and what is the cost of your ambition. How far is too far? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? How do you go through life and overcome and work through trauma? And how do you learn to live with that trauma? And how do you just adjust to this sort of new life? There's, fate and existentialism is a central theme here. There's so much to really sink your teeth into here. I know I've said that about a lot of these series, and I will about the rest of these, I'm sure. But Berserk is just so fantastic and still somehow underrated in the fantasy community, at least anyway, because a lot of people are hesitant with manga, which is understandable. But please give this a try. Please give this a try. Absolutely fantastic. Okay. And that's top 5, right? Top 5. So now we get into number 4. This one holds a very special place in my heart. A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This is special to me because it really ignited me as an adult reader. I read it constantly growing up as a kid, and then I got in this cycle where I was just rereading Harry Potter over and over and over and over, and I still love Harry Potter dearly, and I'm due for another reread. But when Game of Thrones TV show was on, and I really wanted to get more of that, I read the source material, and it just exploded things for me, right? I was like, okay, well, what's similar to this? And I Googled what's a similar series to Song of Ice and Fire, and I found out about the Wheel of Time, and I read all of that, and that led me to Mistborn and so many other things. So this was really very much a gateway series for me, and for that I will always be grateful for it, even if we never get an ending. But although I do still have hope that we will. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I do still have some hope alive that we'll get The Winds of Winter and eventually Book 7 to conclude the series. But this, what more can I say that hasn't already been said about Song of Ice and Fire? The characters are unbelievably fleshed out and real feeling. The combat is awesome and epic at times, but also very close and intimate. One-on-one duels at times. We see, the magic is largely gone from the world, so when we see it, it hits really hard. We get the dragons, eventually, right? And that's terrifying for how that impacts the world. The politics, the different houses maneuvering against each other and with each other, and you will get so wrapped up into following the different houses and what is the emblem on their banner, and what are their words, what's their motto, and who's the head of the house, and what's the family tree, and how are they in conflict with this one, but they're allied with this one. Oh no, there's that conflict over there, so that's going to do this. Like you will get so locked into that. It's so much fun to think of all these theories, and as we learn more and more about the history that led up to the events right before this first book, it's just gotten more and more interesting. And then there's this looming threat of these alien, zombie monsters beyond the wall that are, encroaching, and some people don't believe it's actually happening. And then we have the maesters and all the people, learning, and there's, endless things to get into with this series, and it's just unbelievable. And like I said, even if we never get more books, it's so very much worth your time to read. It is just absolutely fantastic. So Song of Ice and Fire, number 4 on my list. That I think if you catch me on a different day, I could see it higher, right? I could. Now, numbers 2 and 3, I think these are tied, basically, right? I can't. I really can't pick a favorite between these two, and I think any given day I would rank these slightly differently. But going based on the overall series as a whole, on average, that is what made me ultimately decide to put Malazan as number 3 on my list. Now, if it's just Book of the Fallen, it's going to be number 2. But if we think about everything as a whole, I'm going to put it into number 3 spot, because the novels of Malazan Empire by Ian Esselmont, while I did really enjoy them, I didn't enjoy them as much as some other stuff that I think pulls down the average just a hair, right? If I'm being as objective as possible. But Malazan, similar to Song of Ice and Fire, this has everything that you could possibly want and more. This has a lot of the similar things that Song of Ice and Fire has, except rather than the magic being a small thing that hits really hard when you see it, it is this unbelievably huge thing that is so mysterious that learning how it works is a huge selling point, I think, of the series. And you don't learn how it works for a very long time because the characters don't know how it works, So you're seeing through their point of their point of view. So of course we're not going to understand things right away, right? They don't understand things. And as you learn more and more, things start to make sense. And it's not like Allomancy in Mistborn where you know all the rules. It's never like that. There's always a soft element to the magic in Malazan. Some aspects of it are harder than others. There's a very wide range of the things that you're going to see in here. And that's just another really cool element to the story, I think, and you're really dropped into the middle of this crazy battle and this point in history of the Malazan Empire trying to expand and transitioning between somebody new ascending to the throne. And, so we have that whole old guard versus the new guard. We have other nations coming into play. We have these ancient prophecies. We have these characters that have, they all truly have their own motivations, regardless of who they answer to. The gods are very much characters in the world. They interact with the world. They interfere with things. They guide things. They nudge things. They will deliberately take very tangible steps in the real world, playing with life and death, playing with just general events. If there was a more epic word for epic, that would be the word for Malazan, right? Like, epic does not do this justice by any means. It is insane what is happening in this series. I would strongly recommend, if you read the Book of the Fallen specifically, look for themes first and foremost. And I think Esselmont's books as well. Look for themes first and foremost, rather than the plot, even rather than the characters sometimes. I mean, the characters are amazing, but at least for me, it took me a while to get used to Steven Eriksson's character work and how he did things. So I didn't really like his characters that much at first. They felt kind of wooden and like pawns on a game board. But then eventually, once I understood what was happening, then it really clicked into place, and I loved his character work so much. But the themes are central to the story first and foremost. Always the narrative events that are happening are so exciting and so cool. There's so much humor in here. Not all of it lands, but a lot of it does. Even for me, who humor is very hit and miss in books, a lot of it landed for me. I loved it. Some of my favorite characters are the ones that are purely just there for comedy, you think. And then as you learn more and more about them, there might be some other stuff happening there. One of my favorite characters in all of fantasy is in this series, Animander Rake, who is just... I don't even know how to describe Animander. There's no words can describe Animander without going on its own video in and of itself. So I'll just leave it at that. It's one of my favorite characters ever. But Malazan it's a very large series. The books are very large. It will take you a long time to get through. You need to read it you can't speed your way through this, right? You need to really chew your food with this. But the journey is so worth it. The journey is so worth it. There's so much depth. There's so much to explore. You will learn so much about yourself and how you feel about the world. And for that reason, this story means so much to me. Again, if it was just the 10-book Malazan Book of the Fallen, this would be my number 2 series, taking everything into account. It is number 3. So what's number 2? That is the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. And this is another one where there's so much depth here, but it at the same time feels very intimate because we're seeing everything through a single POV of Hadrian Marlowe. And we're seeing his journey from when he's very young at the beginning of this book. This is really the story of sort of his hubris and him learning the Empire isn't quite as perfect as he thought, And then is his journey throughout as he tries to join this war against the Cielsen, these alien vampire predator things, right? That really view human as cattle and food, and they're trying to expand their livelihood, right? And their empire. And this war is at place, is at hand, and Hadrian believes that he can help because he has some extra philosophical and just academic training. And so, he really wants to help, and we see sort of his journey through this thing. And he tells you on page 1 of book 1, I ended the war. I destroyed the sun and ended the Cielsen and ended the war. And a lot of people say, well, man, that removes all the tension from the story. I already know how it ends, and I know that he makes it. And, I will be honest, dude, it does not remove any tension from the story. Rocchio does such a great job of keeping the stakes so high through other means. And it's... wow. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything about this journey, but this is such a roller coaster of emotions. Hadrian is such an interesting, complex character to follow. There's a lot of unreliable narrator that's happening. There's a lot of depth and growth that happens for him. The other characters around him are very, very interesting. You get so attached. What's happening, right? The battle scenes are so well choreographed and so well written, and because again, we're seeing through Hadrian's perspective, and he's not up here commanding the battleships out in space. He's down on the ground, right, in the muck, doing the hand-to-hand fighting and kind of directing some people down there and stuff. So we're seeing all of that. That's so interesting. The Cielsen, the more you learn about them, so amazing. Some of the higher powers at play that we didn't know about, amazing. Some of the connections that we see, this is far in our future. So we see a lot of the history, the invented history of Rachio that got us from our current present day into where Hadrian is now. And that, I mean, tens of thousands of years in the future, I believe it is. That's amazing, right? There's so much about this. There's so much amazing sci-fi stuff. There's so much amazing fantasy stuff that's built into this. This is really a win for both crowds. And where it's going, man, I just can't. I can't say how excited I am. So he has a suggested reading order on his website that includes these main novels. There's 6 of them out currently. There's 3 different short story collections, and there are 3 novellas that are out. And so he kind of gives you the reading order throughout all of those. I personally have read everything except for the 3rd short story collection, which I'm in the middle of now, and Disquiet Gods Book 6. So after that, I will be like the other people who are caught up waiting on Book 7, Shadows Upon Time, which, if you're current on the series, you know how cool that title is and what that could potentially mean. But that should come out sometime at the end of 2025, I believe, is the current timeline. So I can't wait, man. I mean, Sun Eater is one of those that it just means so much to me. And getting to talk to Christopher on my channel was amazing. I got to ask him a couple spoilery questions, and that was super fun. And so I have some things that I'm watching for as we get through the rest of this series. That wow, man, wow. Okay, and then to finish this video off, man, number 1, you guys can see it on the table already, right? The Stormlight Archive. This is number 1 for several reasons. You know, obviously, Sanderson is the king of world building. One of the kings of world building, at least I will say. Because I think Erickson certainly is another king, but he's towards the top of the list anyway with world building stuff. His character work is amazing. His prose is very straightforward. It's not super poetic and purple like an Erickson or like a Rachio or even Pierce Brown now in the later books is kind of getting there. Philip Chase, right, where the prose is very much a part of the experience, and it's the rhythm and the cadence and all of that is part of it. Sanderson's not really like that. It's much more straightforward, which isn't better or worse. It's just something different. And in this story, I tend to appreciate it. And the battle scenes are crazy. The Sanderlanches, everyone, anyone who's a Sanderson fan knows the Sanderlanche is legendary at this point. Wind and Truth is probably going to be mostly Sanderlanche because it's at the end of the series arc, at least, right? The first half before the time skip. And man, there's just so much to love, right? The magic systems that are really science, and that we're learning more and more about how this magic works and how the world works, and the weather is tied into the magic system and tied into the characters and the plot, and everything is so intricately built together, and it works so well, and it's so satisfying. All of that is true, and the connections to his other series, that's amazing too. But to me, the number one thing that makes this my favorite is the emotional impact that this has had on me due to Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. I see different pieces of myself within each of those 3 characters that I have cried in every one of these books so far. These mean so much to me personally that there's no way this can't be my number 1 right now, right? And I'm not saying that it can't be overtaken someday. Of course it could. But for now, where I am in my life, these books mean the absolute world to me. I got to meet Brandon at a con about a year and a half ago now, and I got to tell him that and just thank him. And he's just the nicest, most genuine person ever. I so much look up to him in how he conducts himself as a businessman, how he conducts himself with how he interacts with his fans, and always tries to do the right thing. And he doesn't always do everything perfectly, of course, right? But when he does, he will admit the mistake and try to fix it next time. And all of that together really makes me even more of a fan of him and of the series. So Stormlight is Stormlight's everything to me, man. So nothing else could be number one, at least right now. And there you go, Stormlight Archive, big piece of my heart right there in this story. So there we have it. We made it. My first ever ranked video, my first ever top 10. And I hope you enjoyed it, right? It was kind of hard to rank these, and I think on any given day, some of these are probably going to shuffle around a bit. But that's okay. This is, at least in this snapshot in time, this is my top 10 favorite ongoing fantasy sci-fi series right now. So let me know in the comments, what are your top 10, right? Do we have crossover here? Do you have some other stuff? I'd love to hear about some things that maybe I don't know about, or I just haven't read, or maybe I forgot about it or something, right? I would love to hear that stuff. It's always fun to hear where we have crossover and where we like the same things. It's so fun to talk about the stuff that we both love, but it's also so fun to get different recommendations. And my list to get to is 1.5 miles long, but I want to make it longer, right? It's so much fun, and it's so fun to talk to you guys in the comments. I appreciate it so much every time. And while you're there, if you have not subscribed yet, consider subscribing if you like the channel. Hang out and talk to us in the comments. And the NLR community is growing, and it's amazing, and it's so fun, and it's just my favorite thing, dude. This whole booktube thing has just been my favorite thing that I've done in so long, and it's so much fun, and it makes me so happy. And I can't express just how awesome this has been. So thank you so much for everything. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know your top 10 in the comments. I'll see you next time.